Okay, so now we're going to continue on talking about Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium and what causes populations to deviate from that. So the next one is non-random mating. And what that means is you've got individuals that you can kind of base a pattern on how they're going to mate. So it can happen in one of two ways, assortive or disassortive mating. So assortive mating is going to be where you have phenotypically similar individuals mating, and that's going to cause an increase in the homozygotes. As opposed to disassortive mating, and that's where you have phenotypically different individuals mating with one another, and that's where you're going to see a jump in heterozygotes. So if that's a little confusing, I can kind of show you what we're talking about here. So with assortive mating, that's going to be where I'm going to use the letter B, like the terrible example of the eye color, but we'll just go with it. So that would be blue-eyed people only mating with blue-eyed people, right? So what's going to happen is if we were going to do our Punnett square, right? This is the worst Punnett square I've ever drawn. You're welcome. Little b, 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 right? So that's going to cause a jump in the homozygotes, right? Same thing if you've got brown-eyed people only mating with brown-eyed people, same thing, right? Obviously, there's exceptions to that with the heterozygotes, but in general, you're going to see a jump in homozygotes. Now, with excuse me, disassortive mating, that's going to be where you have phenotypically different individuals mating with one another, and what you're going to see, oh, this is a much better Punnett square. Now you're going to see a jump in heterozygotes, right? So that's the difference between the two types of mating. Okay, moving on. Next thing that can cause some issues as far as causing allele frequencies to change is literally going to be right at the base of this all, and that's going to be mutation. So that's going to be where you have a change in nucleotide sequences. So instead of CGATTA, all of a sudden it's CGATAA, right? So now you've actually had a change. Now that's not going to cause like massive changes because mutation usually needs to happen with something else. So I wouldn't base everything on that. Then we've got gene flow, and that's where you have alleles coming from one population into another. And I'm going to show you a little slide I have for that. All right, so let's say that we have, this is the worst graphics ever, but just go with it. We've got a river, and on one side we have, this is the same species of bunny rabbits, but they're becoming different, right? You can see these ones are becoming white and apparently laying eggs, and this side is going to be brown and they're made of chocolate, but whatever. White ones versus brown ones, right? And so what's going to happen is if they stay isolated by this river, eventually these guys are going to become so different from these guys that they'll probably become separate species. But if this river were to dry up, all of a sudden these guys can mate with one another, and that's going to reduce the differences between the two populations. And so that's going to be an example of gene flow with the worst graphics ever created. You're welcome. Okay, now let's go back to our notes and talk about selection. The last one is going to be selection happening, and there's two types of selection that can happen. You can have artificial, which is like in the example of like having a breeder or something like that. And then you've got natural selection where you have the environment dictating who's going to breed with who. So in order for natural selection to happen, and this is pretty important, there's three conditions that you have to have. First one is you have to have variation, right? You can't have everybody being the same because then no one has an advantage over anyone else. Then, going along with that, that variation needs to result in differences in the number of offspring surviving the next generation. So it can't just be like eye color and that has no effect on anything. It has to be something that's going to give someone an advantage over somebody else. And then the third thing, which we've talked about a lot, that variation has to be genetically inherited. So it has to be in the DNA, not something that you accumulated over your lifetime. Now, in the next video, we'll get into the different types of natural selection that are out there and how the population can shift over time.